Good afternoon. My name is Chris Drozdowski with OriginLab Technical Support. I'll be hosting today's webinar, 10 Things Every Origin User Should Know. Actually, it's a lot more. I'm going to cover a lot more than 10 things, and perhaps I'm going to cover things that you already know. Many of the subjects will be elementary, but this list is based on my experience over several years of working in technical support here at OriginLab. They're just things I think that every user should at least be aware of. And we're going to look at topics ranging from what is your user files folder to copying and pasting graph layers to repeating operations like fittings, to setting system variables. That's a really important one. And if I have time, we're going to take a look at our Digitizer. So let's go ahead and get started with our first subject, your user files folder. Your user files folder is a folder in your file system that Origin uses to keep settings files, graph templates, scripts. It's a default location many times for saving your projects. And I found over the years, we found that not many people are aware of this folder on your file system. And many times when helping a customer, we have to direct them with how to get to this folder. So I'm going to show you how to do it because there's a really simple way in Origin. If you have Origin running, you can simply go to the Help menu, choose Open Folder, and the first item is your user files folder. So I'll open that up. And we can see that it's got a number of files already in it by default, some INI files. Those are settings. I have a couple of graph templates. This is where my graph templates live. When I create graph templates, by default, they get saved here. I have themes. For example, if I do graphing or analysis themes are saved here. You can see the path to this folder. Generally, it is under your user documents folder. For example, mine is under my user Chris, and it documents, OriginLab, and user files. So if we pause for a minute, there is some voice. Sometimes people struggle a little bit. You have to make the audio connection if you cannot hear me. So anyway, that's where this folder is. In fact, if we go up a couple levels, we're at the user files. If we go up a level under OriginLab, we see some other folders. You can ignore this 2017. I'm working in tech support. I have older versions of Origin installed. But this is where our autosave folder is. For example, this current project, I've got an autosave copy sitting here. I have a backup folder, and there's a backup of this project because I've been working with it throughout the morning, and I've got an unsaved folder. Generally, that folder isn't used very much, so that's where your user files folder is. And I'm going to show you one more time just so you get it. I'm going to go to the Help menu, Open Folder, User Files folder. In fact, while we're here, we can see we also have links there to our autosave and project backup folders too. So we can go directly to that autosave folder. In fact, if you have your project saved somewhere, I've never actually used this menu item, but we can go to the current project folder, the folder where the current project you're working on is. That's really handy. So that's our first topic, but let's move on and let's talk about a topic. Let's talk about apps a little bit. We've had apps in many versions of Origin now. Apps are plugins for Origin. They extend the functionality of the product. It used to be if a customer asked for a new feature or in-house we wanted a new feature, we might have to wait till the next release of the product, which would be 6 months or a year even. So we developed a framework for plugins, and that allows us to extend the functionality of the product in mid-release cycle. We have many apps. The way you discover apps is on the right side of the Origin interface. If it is collapsed, you will see a tab entitled Apps. So I will move my mouse over that tab and a little window will pop out. If I move away, it'll shrink again. But if I move over it and then I click this push pin button to turn it down, that pins that window open and it keeps it open for us. And this is where my apps live. I have a number of apps, or rather Origin ships with a number of apps already. A graph maker app, a really nice statistics advisor app, some apps for sending graphs, for example, to Word or PowerPoint, and a couple of fitting apps. But we also, at the top of this window, have Add Apps. And when we click that, it opens the App Center dialog. And this is the place to find and learn about new apps. We have a new and popular category. We can change these on the left side of the dialog. We can look at the popular apps. By the way, we're not the only ones. OriginLab isn't the only ones that produces these apps. We do have end users that produce one. For example, here is one that one of our end users in Germany has created, and he's put in our file exchange, so it shows up in our App Center. So we have new apps, we have popular apps. We can go and search. Essentially, if we go to the search tab, we can see all the apps. We can look at categories of apps. We can go by the minimum version of Origin. We can go by the sorting. By default, the sorting's newest to oldest. But we literally have hundreds of apps on every topic. Let's give an example, though. Let's say fitting. Let's search for fitting. Then I can bring up, I have a number of selections from special peak deconvolution, neural network fitting, linear regression with marginal distribution, comparing data sets, with composite functions. We have a large number of specialized apps, and we were able to release these immediately instead of waiting for that next release. So those are apps, and apps are fairly easy to install. Actually, they're really easy to install. All we have to do is click on this little download and install link. Origin will go ahead and download and install the app, and it will show up in a moment. This is a rather big app. It's going to take a little bit of time to install. While it's installing, I will point out that you can click on the name of the app and it will open our file exchange with information about the app. So sort of like that's a good place to go to learn more about the app. There's help information there. Many apps also have a YouTube video. You can watch the video and learn how to run the app. So let's see, our app is now installed. We can see it in the apps window here, peak deconvolution. So that's how to discover apps and install apps and learn how to use them. All right, let's take a look at another subject today. How to easily change fonts on a graph. And this is a very popular subject. If you'll bear with me just a moment here. All right. I have a graph here. It has a number of text areas. We've got our axis labels. We've got some labels over here. These are actually axis labels too. This is a separate, specially made plot here. We have a title. And by default, it looks like it's just our default Arial font. But what if I want to change? We could change each of these text types independently if we wanted. We could have different font types. But what if I want to universally apply a new font to this whole graph? How to do that? By the way, I'm using Origin 2020B for today's webinar. It is the latest version. We will have a new version in 2 weeks, but this is currently the latest version. Some of the features I'll use in this webinar are exclusive to the newer versions of Origin, and I'm going to show you one now. I can change the fonts everywhere one time by selecting this title and I get a little mini toolbar. This is a newest feature in Origin. It gives us many options for editing that specific object. In this case, it is a text item, and we can select the font if we want. And I'm going to change it to the ever popular Times New Roman. That's very popular in publishing. So let me scroll down my list. I perhaps have too many fonts installed. So I changed this one item to Times New Roman, but I want to change it everywhere. And how to do that? I'm going to bring back my mini toolbar, and I'm going to move across the buttons to the lower left. One on the lower right says Apply Formatting To. And I will click that, and I have a choice: the color of the font, or the font face in this layer, or this whole window. And I'm going to choose to change the font for the whole window. And when I do that, you can see that essentially in one step, the font's been changed everywhere, instead of how we had to do it the old days where you had to go to each area and change them. We can do this in other multi-panel graphs. It doesn't have to come from just a title. It can come from something like these are layer titles. I can do that here. I'll change the font here to, perhaps I'll change it to, let's change it to something like Tahoma. Then I go ahead and click Apply Formatting To this window, font and size. And it will go through. This time, because of the design of this graph, it changed the font face and the size everywhere. It really depends on which you select in terms of whether it's going to change the font size and font face. And I believe we can just hit undo to undo these changes if we're not happy, and then we can redo them. Generally speaking, the actions you perform with our mini toolbars are undoable. So that's how we can change the font everywhere at one time. Let's look at another subject: drag and drop plotting. I find myself explaining this a lot to people because it's really convenient, but it's not as obvious as we'd like. We've got a simple amplitude versus wavelength spectra type data set here. I'm going to select my X and Y and go ahead and choose plot, line, and just do a line plot. But I've got a number of other worksheets with similar data sets. In fact, I've got, I think, about 10 of them here. I won't do this 10 times, so I'll do it a few times. I want to add the data set from each of these worksheets onto this graph and ultimately create a grouped graph. So let me go to the next worksheet I want to add. And this is how we're going to do this. Watch very carefully. I will select the entire Y column. And then I'll move my mouse to the right and down. And I'll move it. And at some point, as I near the edge of this column, my cursor will change to an arrow plus this little stack of plots. When that happens, I hold my mouse down and I drag over to the graph and drop, and I get another plot. Let's try that one more time. Select the entire column, mouse down and to the right till it changes, hold mouse button down, drop. So we keep doing that as many times as we want. This is very handy, actually, and I think it's a good thing. I think you really should know. So let's say we've dragged and dropped enough. Let's take this a step further. I want to group these together. Let me show you the quick way to do that. We have another window on the right side of the Origin interface beside the apps window. I'm going to toggle that push button so our apps window closes. And the other window that's kind of over there that may be closed is the Object Manager. Let me select it, and again, I'm going to pin it open by clicking on that push pin. The Object Manager is a quick way to access properties of the graph. It also shows us that hierarchy that I've talked about in other webinars. An origin graph is a hierarchy of containers at the highest level. I know I've kind of gone off a tangent, but this is good to know too. At the highest level, this white area, that is a graph page. A graph page is a container for one or more layers. This is your layer here. It's got axes attached to it. A layer is a container for one or more plots. In this case, we have 5 plots in this layer. Generally, we get used to using the plot details dialog to manage the settings related to these containers. We have many toolbars now. We'll see one in a minute, but we also have the object manager, which mimics that hierarchy. And I want to group these. And in the object manager, I have many options, many options for different things I can do. The main one to group is I will select the first plot and right click and choose set as group begin. And when I do that, our graph is now grouped. Now I'm going to use our mini toolbar. I'll go ahead and use the mini toolbar to change the color list. Grouped plots use color lists. I'm going to change the color list and the size of the plot. Let me go ahead and come over to the top right, this toolbar, and turn on our anti-aliasing. Anti-aliasing is a way to get your especially your line plots to look visually smoother on the screen. It doesn't necessarily affect your exporting, but it improves your screen visual performance. All right, so let's go ahead and first change our plot size. Then we're going to change our color list. I will click on one of the plots to select it. I get my mini toolbar, and I waited too long, and I'm going to use this increase line thickness button just to jack up that line thickness a little bit. From the same mini toolbar, I can click on the line color button. And because it is a grouped plot, by default, it's going to let me select colors by plot. And I'm going to choose an increment list. I'm not sure which one. Let's just choose maybe this bold 1 color list. And when I do that, we can see that the color list has been applied. While I'm here, let me show you one more thing. I think this is actually fairly commonly known, but if you don't know it, it's good to know. What if I want to offset these spectra instead of them being on top of each other? I want to create a vertical offset. That's fairly simple. We just double click on the graph to open our plot details dialog. If you've used Origin much at all, you've been in this dialog. At the layer level, I will come to the Stack tab, and I have options for offset, the simplest one being auto. And then I'm going to say apply. Our graph looks messed up temporarily. Say OK. And now I can come in on the right side on the toolbar and rescale the y-axis. And that's how we get that attractive offset. So if you didn't know about that, that's how you do it. Let's look at our next subject today. This comes up not infrequently. It's not entirely obvious how to do that. We're used to in Origin the concept of the X and Y plot designations, and that you need to have an X column and a Y column to make a plot in most cases. Believe it or not, you don't have to always have an X column and a Y column. You can plot Y versus Y, and let me show you how. I have a workbook here. It's got some automotive data, just information about the engines, gas mileage, make, engine displacement, that sort of thing. I want to actually plot my power column, column C, versus my engine displacement, column G. Column G will be my X values, and column C will be my Y values, even though the designations and the columns are both actually Y. And let's look at how to do this. Let me create a blank graph. I'll move it down out of the way. With the graph active, when we use the term active, by the way, that means whatever window has the focus. This graph has the focus. It is the active window. We will go to the graph menu, and I will choose plot setup. And this is a complex dialogue. It can be a little overwhelming, but don't let it overwhelm you. If you're patient and you watch what I do now, it'll get you a long way. I need to find my particular worksheet here. So I went ahead and chose from this list the Worksheets in folder. So I got my worksheet listed on the right side. I click one time to select the worksheet. Now in the middle panel of this dialog, I see a list of columns, a list of as rows, the columns in the worksheet, and columns which is X, which is Y. So I said I wanted to make the engine displacement my X data, so I'm going to check that under X. And for my power, I have my Y here, what it should do, and I have my row here for power. I will check that checkbox. So for my X data, I have engine displacement, even though it's a Y column. And for my Y data, I have power, and it's way over on the left, and that's okay. There's a Y column. I want to make it a scatter plot, so I'll select that. And I think I got deselected here. I did. So let's select engine displacement versus power. Now I will click the add button. And if I want, I can take a preview of what the graph will look like. It looks like what I want, so I'll say okay. And I get my graph. And from here on out, I can customize it using our mini toolbar. Let's just do a quick customization so I can show you how easy it is to do. So we can get a quick customization. Maybe we're a little too transparent. So that's how you plot a Y versus Y. Plot setup dialog. Let's look at another topic. Copy and pasting plots and layers. This is a great thing to know. You may not use it, but it's good to know. Let's look at how we can copy a plot. I have done a fitting. I've got a scatter plot with error bars, and I've done a Gaussian fitting to it. So I've got this fitted curve, but I wanted to present it a little differently. I wanted to get a little visually more fancy. So I made a column plot from the data with error bars. But I want that fitted curve over on this column plot too. How can I do that? I mean, I could go in, I could hunt down my data in my worksheet and drag and drop plot to bring it in, but I could go graph to graph. And what I will do is I will click one time on that fitted curve and I get my mini toolbar and I can move over. This is a plot level mini toolbar and select copy plot. Then all I have to do is come to my destination graph and hit Control V to paste. It's that simple. Let me go ahead and remove that. So let me show you again. I selected my source plot from the mini toolbar, chose to copy it, went to my destination and hit Control V to paste. Okay, let's move on to the next subject in terms of copying and pasting. Let's look at copying and pasting layers. I have two graphs here I'd like to combine. They're cooling curves. I could use, okay, I have a question. I'm always trying to drag and plot, but it never works. Maybe because my graphs open in their own window when I plot a graph. How do I make graphs show up in the same window as the workbook so I can drag and plot? You can drag and plot. Let me go back there. I guess that question's a little bit old, but let's go back. You don't have to have the graph attached to the workbook. You just have to have them kind of side by side. That's what you need to do. You just sort of have it. You have it so it's easy to drag. This is a challenge. It is a challenge. It takes some practice. It's that movement of that mouse and holding it down and dropping. And essentially the idea, you just want to make it so that drag, rearrange your windows so that drag is as easy as possible. Well, let's get back to where we were. Let's talk about copying and pasting layers. Anyway, I have these two graphs and I want to combine them into one graph. I could use Origin's merge graph feature, but I don't have to. I can do it. This is pretty simple and I can do something different. I'm going to move this top layer right here and I'm going to combine it into the same graph as this layer. I'm going to start by shrinking down this layer size some and maybe shrinking this down some. Then all I have to do is select the layer hit Control-C to copy. It's a little different than plots. We had to do a mini toolbar for the plot for technical reasons, but here we can do Control-C. I'll come to my destination and just hit Control-V and paste that layer. Once I do that, we have a neat toolbar that lets us set uniform sizes and alignments. Let's go ahead and adjust maybe this graph a little bit, get our size for one of them right. Then I select one layer, and then holding the Shift key, I select the other layer. And on the lower right side of the Origin interface, we have a toolbar for alignment and sizing. I have a uniform width button. I have a uniform height button. And I have a left, right, or top align. I'm going to align the left sides. So now we can see how we align these two graphs. Like I say, you could have used the merge graph functionality for this, but let me show you where copying and pasting layers actually could be very important. I'm going to go to our Learning Center. The Learning Center is a great place to learn more about Origin graphs, and I'm going to find a certain graph that's got a very complex layer structure. We have many, many graphs in this list, so let me hunt down for it. Let me find it. They tend to slip right by. Here we go. This graph here, this graph, were you to want to make it, would be an excellent candidate for copying and pasting layers, because we've got one layer up here, a layer here, an inset, 4 contour layers. You could plot these all separately, and then doing that copying and pasting layers, you could assemble this graph, and it would be much easier than trying to add layers here and adjusting them and having to keep up with all the layers at one time. Instead, you could just focus on different graphs and then just bring them together and assemble them. So that's copying and pasting plots and layers. Let's talk about speed mode. This may be a very obvious thing for many people. Bear with me a minute. In Origin, if you try to plot an extremely large number of data, that can slow down Origin a bit. That can slow down the rendering process of the graph. It's just handling a lot of data can be difficult. So we've had this feature forever. We've introduced speed mode. Speed mode takes a reduced sampling of the original data and graphs that. By reducing the number of points graphed, the graph is able to render faster. And it may be hard to make out in the webinar, but this graph has a watermark that says speed mode is on, and it is. Let's take a look at what happens when we turn off speed mode and how we can turn it off. We first, in the simplest ways, we can turn it off via a toolbar button on the upper left part of Origin. It's a little running guy, and right now the speed mode's on, and I can click it to turn it off. It's going to take a while because I have so much data in this graph. It's taking a while to draw. It's going to take a while. This is why we have speed mode. Let's give it a few seconds here. You can see the importance of this feature. By the way, while it's drawing, I want to mention a couple things. You can adjust the properties of how speed mode behaves from the plot details dialog. Also, speed mode, unless you say otherwise, speed mode does not affect your export. You will always export with the original amount of data in the plot. You will not get a reduced plot when exporting just because speed mode is on, unless you want that. So that's speed mode off. It's okay now, but if we did something to redraw it, it would take several seconds. And I mentioned we could adjust speed mode settings if you really want to do that. You open the plot details dialog, and at the layer level, I think it's under display. It's under the display speed tab, and we can change our settings for speed mode if we want to. So that's sort of how speed mode works. It's designed just to make your life easier when you're plotting a lot of data. Now let's talk about a relatively new subject with Origin. Data connector data and preserving it. Data connectors are a new way of importing data into Origin. The idea is that you connect to a data file to bring the data in. Now, the data connector has a certain threshold size. If the file gets to be too large, and I'm actually not sure if I remember exactly what that size is. If the file is too large, you can import the data into Origin, but by default, Origin may not save that data in your project. It may just save a link to that file, and later you can bring in the data. That's one thing about the data connector. It doesn't do that all the time, but it's only with certain large file sizes. The data connector also does one other thing. It locks your imported data. It makes it difficult to change it. But what if you want neither of these things? What if especially you don't want that data locked? You just want to import the data and then do what you want with it. Let's take a look at how we can make it so that you can liberate your data from that connection. I have a workbook here, a blank one. I'm going to go to Data, Connect to File, and I'm going to connect to a CSV file. I may have to hunt it down, bear with me. Which file do we want? We want our dose response inhibitor. So let me navigate to the OriginLab folder in our programs and 2020B folder. Come down to my samples. Origin ships with a large number of samples. Curve fitting, and here we go. So we're going to let the data connector automatically do things, and I'll just click OK, and I see the data's brought into Origin. What I want to do with this data is I've actually got a dose, and I want to transform this column to the log of these values. Normally, I would come into my f of x cell and enter my log function here. Let's try it. I can't do that because the data connector, kind of in the name of data preservation, locks our data for us. As long as it's connected to that file, it's going to lock that data. Maybe I want to add a new column and move it over to the left. Because that data is locked, I can't move that column. So let me go ahead and delete that. What I want to do is I want to break that connection, and the way I break that connection, I go to this icon here. This is the data connector icon that indicates that shows us information about the connection, that import connection. It gives us options to re-import, to auto-import. I could like forcibly say exclude the data when you're saving the project. Only ever save the connection. I can force that if I want, but I want to actually remove this data connector. And when I do, now my data is free to be modified, and I can come in to this f of x row and I can log that data. Log A. And I get that, and I've now converted that column to a logarithmic scale. All right, let's look at the next topic today. Let's talk about recalculation mode. This is one of my favorite topics in Origin. And I evangelize about the importance of understanding it. I have got actually that dose response data I just imported. I graphed it, and I want to do a fitting of this from the graph. So I go to the analysis menu, go to fitting, and I'm going to open my nonlinear curve fitter. I won't spend time in this dialog. That's a whole separate webinar. Let me just choose my function. And I have an option in this dialog before I close it at the top. It is the recalculate mode, and I have 3 options. I have manual, none, and auto. Manual recalculate. All right, let me explain the background. When you perform a fitting or statistics in Origin, or a column formula, those are what we call operations. You got a fitting operation, a statistical operation, a column setting column values operation. Operations are smart. They keep an eye on their source data. They know when the source of the operation, that data, they know when it changes. And they can make a decision what to do. And the recalculate mode I specify here helps Origin decide with that decision. By default, many operations are a manual mode. What that means is when that source data changes, the analysis is going to stay as it is, but there are going to be visual indicators, and I'll tell you about that in a minute, that say you need to rerun that analysis. You need to recalculate it. That's manual. None means you're just doing that analysis one time. For example, maybe I'm only doing this fitting one time. I actually don't want Origin to watch the source data. It's one and done. Rarely, if ever, see anyone do that. The final mode is auto. Auto, if you specify auto, then Origin knows it's watching that source data. And as soon as that source data changes, Origin's going to rerun that analysis. Auto, make sure your data and your analysis results stay in sync. I always encourage people to use auto. That way, they know for sure that their data and their analysis are in sync. So I chose auto here. Let me finish my fitting. And we'll get to the next topic in recalculate. Having explained mode, no, we won't go to the report sheet yet. I want to point out the next subject related to operations and recalculation. When you perform an operation like this fitting, anywhere that there is data associated with the output of that operation, for example, the fitted curve on this graph, if there's data on this graph, you will get a little green lock icon. That lock icon indicates there's an operation. And it gives you access back into that operation. By clicking on it, we get a context menu with many options. Before I go any further, I will point out, if I had set my recalculation to be manual and my source data had changed, this lock icon would have been yellow. It would have been yellow, in which case I would have clicked on it and just chosen recalculate. But auto, it's not going to ever turn yellow. So let's go back to this context menu, and we have many options. We can, for example, the most popular one is change parameters. That reopens the analysis dialog. We reopen this fitting dialog, and maybe we want to change something and then rerun the fitting. I don't, but we could from the change parameters. We can go to the results report. If you've done analyses in Origin, almost all analyses generate some sort of report. The report also has its own lock icon with a very similar, if not identical, context menu. We can actually go to the source data from the lock icon. So that lock icon really is a very powerful feature for operations and recalculation. Now let's actually look at a related topic, copying and pasting operations and repeating operations for all Y columns. I am going to repeat that fitting I just did. Let's say I have a number of different data sets here plotted. And I want to do the same fitting for all of them quickly. Let me show you a nifty trick that not many people know about, but I think is pretty nice. Let me do one fitting. I'm going to select my dose response fit function. I am going to fix my parameters. Let's say we want to fix them where they are. Maybe my A1 and A2. I don't know. And I'll do my fitting. And I want to Got to remember to set that recalc to auto. You don't have to set it to auto. I just urge you to. So I've done that fitting. Now I don't want to go to the report sheet. I've got this lock icon on this graph, and watch this neat feature. I've got these other data sets plotted. I want to fit them too. I'm going to go to this bottom lock icon. The top one is not related to this. The bottom one is. And I am going to come to the almost very bottom, and I'm going to choose copy operation. And then I can come over to the next graph. And I can click on the plot, right click, and choose paste operation. And it's going to paste and run that exact fitting, except with this plotted data. I can do it again. I don't have to click on the plot. I can just click somewhere in the graph and choose paste operation, and it'll do it again. I can even do a multi-panel graph. This is a stack plot with 3 different data sets. I just come out to the white area outside all my layers, paste operation, and it's going to fit every single data set in that graph. I think that's a pretty neat way to repeat your analysis many times. Again, somebody is saying they can't hear me well. I apologize. I don't know why there's a problem today, but apparently most people can. I apologize if you can, but if you couldn't, you wouldn't be able to hear me. Let's move to the next topic. Let's look at repeating an operation. Another way to do it. This time we have a column-based operation. I want to smooth every column in this worksheet, but I'm going to start with just one of them. It's an exponential decay data. So let me I'm going to select my Y column. Just so you know, in Origin, if you have an XY pair of columns that are needed for a graph or an analysis, if you just select the Y column, Origin's going to be smart enough to find that X column. It's going to look to the left till it finds that first X column. So all I need to do here is select my Y column, and I will go to Analysis, Signal Processing, Smooth. And I'm going to turn on my auto preview. I'm going to set my recalculate and smoothing dialog to auto. I see in my preview, I've done a little bit of smoothing. We're not here really to talk about smoothing, but I'll just work a little bit on it, smooth out that data. And I'm going to say, okay, and I've run my operation. I've done that smoothing, my operation. But I want to smooth these other columns. I only have 3 here, but I may have like 99 of them. How can I do that quickly? I go to the lock icon. Because the smoothing dumped its output into this worksheet, I get a lock icon at the top of that column. It's very similar to my other lock icons from the fitting. I can change parameters, reopen the dialog, many other options. But the one we're interested in is at the very bottom. Repeat this for all Y columns. This is not available for all column-based operations, only certain ones. But if you're performing one where this is available, it's pretty neat because all we have to do is select it, and Origin's going to go ahead and repeat that. For example, that's smooth for every column. Bam, bam, bam. It did it that quickly. So that's another nifty ease of use feature that you should remember. Let's look at another topic, copying worksheets and folders. This is a relatively new feature in Origin. It's pretty nifty. Let's do some theoretical work here. What if I want to copy this no inhibitor data to be in the same workbook as my inhibitor? All I have to do is come to my worksheet, right click and choose copy sheet, come over to my destination workbook, right click on that tab and choose paste as new sheet. So that's how we can copy and paste. And I'll show you we can actually copy and paste across Origin instances. We can also copy and paste entire folders with everything in them. I will copy this folder right here. Let me right click on it and choose copy. And I'll come up here to my root level of P and I will paste it. And that makes an exact copy of the folders. of the folder and its contents. But what's really neat is I can start another instance of Origin. You can ignore that. All right, so I have another instance of Origin. Let's say I have a whole nother project. I could not only copy this worksheet, let's copy sheet, and go to my other project and paste as a new sheet. So not only can I go across projects with sheets, I can go across projects with whole folders. Copy the folder, come over to my other project, paste the folder. So there we go. So those are fairly new features in Origin. They may be exclusive to 2020B and later. So let's keep on moving. We're running a little tight on time today. A quick feature, return to last window. I have a workbook here. Let me show you. I graphed it, but I put it in a subfolder. I want to go back and forth. I have got my graph here. Let's say this is in a crowded folder of other graphs. It's not now, but let's say it is. I want to go back to my workbook, back to my graph, back and forth. I could go and keep messing with Project Explorer, but I can also from the window menu just choose return to last window, and it'll take me to the last active one. I can go back, return to last window. I can also use Control-Alt-Z and just toggle back and forth. So that is a handy convenience feature if you need to look at data graph, and they're not in the same folder. All right, I think we're going to need to speed up a little bit, folks, because we're going to look at the script and command windows. This is good to know. Both the script and the command windows are a way of running LabTalk script. They are both accessible from the window menu. I will open them both. First, I'll open the command window. Let me put it out of the way. Then I'll open the script window. The script window is like a very, very, very basic text code editor. You can put code in it, LabTalk script, and run it. In fact, let me show you that. I'm not sure what it does. I just grabbed some LabTalk from our help documents. Let me just copy it from a notes window and paste it into the script window. And what I do is I can run the script by hitting Control-A to select the whole thing, all the selected text, and then hitting Enter, and it will run the script. And it did something. I think it normalized some data over in the workbook. So the idea is I put my script here, Control-A to select all the code I want to run, which is all of it, hit Enter to run it. So that's how the script window works. From the script window, if you have a script you run all the time, you can save it. It's saving it to, remember our user files folder? That's where it's going to save it, my script. You can save it wherever you want, but by default, it's going in that user files folder. I could, let's say I come back a week later and need that script. I could open it, pull it right out from my user files folder. All right, let's take a look at the command window. The command window is very similar, but it's really designed for, and hold just a minute, please. Okay, the command window, it's really designed for one-liners. For example, I mean, you can run complex scripts in it, but really, maybe we just want to do a simple calculation, like let's say what the log of something is, like log of 1.2345, just something like that. And it'll give us the answer. Or I could, let's just say I want to change this workbook long name in code rather than use the GUI. I could just say page point long name equals my book. I think that's the right code. Yeah, it is. So the command window is good for one-liners, but what the command window is really good for is you can use the arrow keys to go up and down in its history. If there is a single line of code you run all the time, run it in the command window, and then all you have to do is it'll keep up with that history, and you can use the up arrow key to go back. I'm back on calculating that log. I'm back on setting that long name of that workbook. So those are the script and command windows. Let me go back. A lot of the time in tech support, we ask people to run scripts in the script window. Let me just review that one more time. I think it would help. I put my script here, Control A to select all of it, and just hit enter, and it runs. So that's a script in the command window. Now let's move up to another topic, system variables and setting them. I'm going to close my script window. I'll leave my command window open. I'll make it a little smaller and park it down here. Origin has what are known, let me close the object manager too while I'm here. Origin has what are known as system variables. They are variables that control how Origin behaves. And there are literally hundreds and hundreds of them. On a daily basis, you don't need to know anything about system variables. The settings that they come with are what we think are the ideal settings. But on occasion, and it's usually us in tech support to get you to do it, we ask you to change a system variable. I'm going to show you how to do that. System variables take the form, let me pop open a note window, of at something, like at CDB. That's the example I've got here. What the CDB is it controls whether when you clear cells, whether it just shows a blank cell, whether it shows a little missing value, a little double dash symbol. I'll show that to you. There are literally system variables for everything you can think of, but they take that form of the at symbol and some series of letters. We can check on the value of a system variable from the command window. I'm going to type in at CDB equals and hit enter. And I can see that value is 1 right now for this. That is the default value. I haven't touched it. And if I look over in my description, it says missing values always show as a blank cell. What that means is if I come in here and I clear some of my cells, what's going to happen? It just displays as blank. But maybe you're saying, hey, I'd rather see that missing value symbol like it used to show. I like it the old way. And we'll say, well, you could change your system at CDB system variable and get back that behavior you love. The best and easiest way to do that is from the preferences menu, system variables. We have a table here. The bottom row will be empty. I'm going to enter the variable name. I'm going to skip that at symbol here. This is where we ignore that at, and we do CDB for the variable. It pops up its current value. I want to turn that off. I'm going to toggle it from its current default 1 to 0. And I can give it a comment if I want. Show missing instead of blank. And I'll say OK. So this variable's been set. Now when I clear cells, let's say there was data in there and I clear it. Now it shows me that missing, it shows me those missing values. So that's how a system variable works. What if I want to get rid of the system variable? I can come in and choose Preferences, System Variables, select it, right-click, and choose Delete. For some system variables, let's check its value now. It is still 0. You may have to restart Origin for it to go back to the default value. Or you can always just manually set it. You can also set system variables at the command line doing at CBD equals 1, and that generally sets them for the current session only. Some it sets it permanently, but for this one, it's the current session. Like I say, we have hundreds of them. Almost the only time you're ever going to set them is when we tell you to. All right, let's look at a couple more topics. Let's look at our lost Project Explorer. This happens less frequently now than it used to, but it happens not infrequently. Let's say that you've dragged your Project Explorer somewhere out of its default location on the top left, and you're working, and it keeps getting in your way, and you keep moving it, and you're getting frustrated. So you just close it. A few minutes later, it's where's your Project Explorer go? How are you going to get it back? It's not where it usually is on the left side. Where did it go? We do get a lot of requests for this. It's very simple. Go to the View menu. Look for Project Explorer, and it will come back. It will be where you last left it. But what if you want to put it back where it originally was, the quickest and easiest way? Or, for example, you're working on a graph, and you have our data reader, and you're reading data, and for some reason you drag our data info window way over to another monitor, and then you lose it. You have no idea where it goes. You just can't find it. The simplest thing to do is to come to the View menu, first item, Toolbars, and we're going to come over and click this Reinitialize button. When we do that, Origin's going to reset all like the Project Explorer like windows, the data info window, the toolbars. It's going to reset the GUI. It takes a few moments while it redoes everything. So now we're back. We've got our Project Explorer where we want it. Our data info window should be where we want it. I need to bring back our data reader. Now, there's our data info window. It's no longer lost. We found it. So that's how we can reset everything and find lost windows or find where our Project Explorer went. Oh, it did reset my Project Explorer here a little bit. All right, let's look at a couple last subjects. This may be obvious, but let's look at sending graphs to PowerPoint. Let me fire up PowerPoint for a minute here. I've got a blank slide here. The simplest way is to take a graph and go to Edit, Copy Page, go to PowerPoint, Control-V to paste it. This creates an embedded graph that is editable in Origin. We've talked about this. I won't show you about that in-place editing. That's one option. Another, and these also work in Word too. Another way to get a graph into PowerPoint and Word is to use Edit and Copy Graph as a picture. And when I do that, this is a picture. It is no longer linked to Origin. It's not an embedded Origin graph. It's just a plain old picture if you just want a plain picture. Let me delete that. Lastly, what if we have multiple graphs? What if I want to send both these? Maybe I have 2, maybe I have 10 graphs I want to send to PowerPoint. Well, we have an app for that. I'll come over to my app window. You remember at the beginning of the webinar, and I'm going to come down to send graphs to PowerPoint. And I get a fancy dialog. I'm not going to cover every setting in this dialog. It's pretty fancy. But I get a list of the graphs that I can send. I'm going to just choose both of them. I can insert them as a picture, an embedded object. I can keep the aspect ratio. Many options, like a title. Maybe I want a title at the bottom of the slide. I can have a template here. I don't have time to show you today, but I could have a PowerPoint template that I could load up. And I could optionally just save it after I'm done. But I'm going to go ahead and click Send. And we'll see the Origin has sent both the graphs to PowerPoint quickly. So that's sending graphs to PowerPoint. Most of the same concepts apply to Word. And like I said, let me minimize this. This dialog has many, many options, including the ability to save settings. If you have a series of favorite settings, you can save them for this dialog. Now let's look at one last topic for today. Let's look at our Digitizer. This is kind of fun. Let me get rid of data info window. Oh, it doesn't want to do it without a graph, so I'm just going to close it like this. Let's say we find a graph out on the interwebs. Let me find one. I've got a link for one here. Let's say we have a graph. In fact, this is a graph that we made several years ago. I may have made this. I want to get this data out of this graph, but I don't have a data set. I don't actually have the data published. We're going to use Origin's Digitizer. The Origin's Digitizer goes from an image to data. So let me just move my browser out of the way for now. From the Tools menu, I will select a Digitizer, and we have a dialog that should pop up. The first thing I have to do is select an image. I could select an image file, or I could import it from the clipboard. Well, I've got my web browser right here with the graph I want. So I'm just going to right click and choose copy image. Then I've got that image now on my clipboard. I can come into the Origin Digitizer and click that import from clipboard, and I get an image. So let's digitize now. And the first thing I need to do is to set my ranges, my X and Y range. And I do that with these. You don't have to remember this, but I'm just basically showing you do that. We can do this with these guides I'm moving. And I need to set the X and Y values based on the guides. 0 to 3 and 0 to 3.5 for my X and Y. Once I do that, I can just start picking points. We have some auto detect features, ways to do auto detection of plots. It wouldn't be really suitable here because it would get confused with that fitted curve. When I'm done, I can click go to the data, and there's my data. Close the digitizer, get rid of my image, and I've got my data. So that's the digitizer. All right, we're going to begin to wrap things up. I'm going to take about 5 minutes through the poll now. I'd really, really like you to take time to do the poll. It's very important to us. And I'm just going to talk real quick about the things we did today. Okay, let's look. We started out with that user files folder. That's a very, very important topic. Very few Origin users understand about the user files folder. I hope you understand better now. We talked about discovering and installing apps. I showed you how you can easily change the font everywhere on the graph. Showed drag and drop plotting. That just takes some practice. I showed plotting Y versus Y as opposed to Y versus X, that kind of thing. We pasted plots and we pasted layers. We looked at speed mode. Then we looked at how when we bring data in from the data connector, if we want to keep it in the project or if we want to edit that data, how we can remove that data connector. We talked extensively about recalculation mode and lock icons. Then I showed you copy and paste operations. Remember, we copied and pasted that fitting from graph to graph to graph, and how we repeated that smoothing for all Y columns. Then we copied worksheets and folders within the project and across 2 different projects. I showed you that feature that return to last window lets us toggle between 2 windows. We briefly touched on the script and command windows just so you know what they are and the basics of running a script. We talked about the system variables as hundreds and hundreds of ways to control Origin that you don't need to know about, usually unless we tell you to do something with them. We looked at getting our Project Explorer back and resetting our user interface. We looked briefly at how to send graphs to PowerPoint. Lastly, we looked at our digitizer. We brought that image in off the internet and we digitized that data and got a data set. So that was today's webinar. We've still got about 2.5 more minutes. we still have about 2.5 more minutes on the poll. I'd really like you to do that for us, and I'm just going to hang out. I appreciate you taking the time with me, and thank you for attending.